what I learned from this rabbi is an incredible ability to connect with people in a very human way. Okay, friends, the story begins. We are diving into Tractate Ketubot 17a. The link that we had sent, it's going to be the second paragraph. And we actually discussed the beginning of this section a couple of weeks ago, where we spoke about the various customs and how to praise a bride, why you would praise a bride, how you praise a bride. And the Talmud then continues a statement from Rav Dimi. If you look at the second paragraph, you see it? When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, from the land of Israel to Babylonia, to Bavel, he said, this is what they sing before the brides in the West, in the land of Israel. No eyeshadow, no eye rouge. Sorry, no rouge, no like makeup, and no braiding of the hair. And yet she's comparable to a graceful ibex. Is it an ibex or an ibex? Anybody know?
Trying to find in the text where you're looking.
But
What?
in English, I've always heard ibex in English.
Ibex. What's an ibex?
It's a clean animal that the long shofar is made from.
Oh, okay, I see. Okay, fine. So she's compared to an ibex. The Gemara then relates that when the sages ordained Rabbi Zera is one of the venerable sages of the Talmud. This is what they'd say. They metaphorically saying with regard to him in this praise. They said the same exact praise to him. No eyeshadow, no rouge. This rabbi doesn't wear eyeshadow. This rabbi doesn't wear makeup. This rabbi doesn't braid his hair. And he's comparable to a graceful ibex. Okay, that's an interesting statement. They're ordaining Rabbi Zera. He's becoming a rabbi. And they're praising his great rabbinic qualities, his great academia, his great understanding of the Talmud. This guy doesn't wear makeup and doesn't do much with his hair, doesn't braid it. What does that have to do with his rabbinical ordination? How is that a praise? Let's take a step back for a second. What is ordination? The Hebrew word, what are they call it ordination in English, right? Yeah, they ordained Rabbi Zera. What is the Hebrew word? Smicha. Right, what does smicha mean? So we know this from the Torah. When Moshe Rabbeinu and Moses was handing over the reins to Joshua, he supported his hands on Joshua, metaphorically saying, like, I'm going to be relying on you. And that's called smicha, to support, to rely, to lean on. So traditionally, rabbinic ordination has been called smicha. Now, smicha of old is not smicha of new. What we call rabbinic ordination these days is not what rabbinical ordination was. What rabbinical ordination was, so Moshe receives the Torah from Sinai directly from God, which means his understanding of halacha, his interpretation of halacha is authoritative. He then qualifies Joshua because he taught Joshua. Joshua then qualifies the next group of scholars. And the next group of scholars qualify the next. And there's this unbroken chain of rabbis that have been educated from somebody who's been educated, all the way going back to Moses. And that's what smicha traditionally meant. And in order to make certain halachic rulings, you need smicha. I'll give you an example. You cannot have capital punishment in Judaism without smicha, without a beis din, without a rabbinical court, a panel of rabbis that have smicha, that have this ancient smicha. Just side note, this type of smicha doesn't exist anymore. It ended with the Talmud. One of the reasons why the Talmud is so authoritative is because these rabbis actually knew something, right? They they were ordained by somebody they had an unbroken tradition from Moses. Smicha these days is, I mean, it's the idea of, it's the same wisdom that's unbroken, but the authority is not the same. What smicha essentially means is you have permission from your rabbi to make halachic rulings, to interpret halacha, which is a very big deal. There's a question, by the way, how legitimate smicha is these days, how necessary it is these days. I mean, everything's in the books. Just look in the books, right? At any rate, Rabbi Zera is an incredible scholar, and they're giving him smicha. By the way, just to highlight how intense and how studious he was, the Talmud says that there's a bit of a difference between the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud. You know the difference? I mean, the main difference is it's a very different style of learning. The Jerusalem Talmud is pretty clear cut. The way the Talmud is structured, it's kind of a running commentary on the Mishnah. And the Talmud will ask questions on the Mishnah. And in the Jerusalem Talmud, you'll have answers. And with those answers, you'll have conclusions in halacha and Jewish law. The Babylonian Talmud is a lot more complicated because you'll have the Mishnah, you'll have a question on the Mishnah. The Talmud will challenge the premise of that question. The Talmud will challenge the premise of that question and then challenge the premise of that premise and say, bring me a source. And eventually you'll get to a conclusion, sometimes even the same conclusion, maybe, not always. It's a lot more of a roundabout way. It's a longer route. With that longer route comes clarity. Now, Rabbi Zera was from Bavel, from Babylon. So he was studying the Babylonian style of learning. He comes to Jerusalem and he realizes he's going to have to learn, but his learning is going to be very different. So the Talmud says he fasted 40 fasts to forget the entire Babylonian Talmud. Now, again, Babylonian Talmud is still in the process of being written, but I think it means the Babylonian style of learning. So he could adopt the Jerusalem Talmud, the Jerusalem style of learning, the learning of clarity, the learning of sharpness. I'm sharing this with you just to illustrate the studiousness of Rabbi Zera. Now, what kind of praise is this? This is a great scholar. No eyeliner, no makeup, doesn't even braid his hair. What are they talking about? What are they saying? So I'd like to share with you three interpretations. And from these three interpretations, we are going to understand the qualities that leadership should have. Make sense? Interpretation number one is by the Maharsha. The Maharsha is one of the commentaries on the Talmud that focuses a lot on the Agadata portion of Talmud, on the homiletic parts of Tanya, of Talmud, the ethical parts of the Talmud, not just the halachic parts of Talmud. And he says, what is this? What do these three things represent? Him not wearing eyeliner, you wouldn't expect him to, right? Him not wearing makeup, him not braiding his hair. These are metaphorical. As we mentioned in previous discussions, the general rule of thumb is when the Talmud is discussing halacha, it's literal. When the Talmud is discussing philosophy, it's often metaphorical. What's the metaphor here? Eyeliner means something covering your eye. It's almost like a lens. And Rabbi Zera didn't have lenses on. He had clarity. We mentioned he went from Babylon to Jerusalem, from a way of studying that required unpacking details to raw clarity. And with that came clarity. Rabbi Zera had clarity. His vision wasn't tainted. His vision wasn't tainted by his own biases. His vision wasn't tainted by his own agendas and desires. Just pure access to truth, no eyeliner. He didn't have any makeup on his face. He wasn't trying to hide. He wasn't trying to create a certain image, a certain theatrical persona of this is what I want leadership to look like. This is what I want people to buy into. Essentially, he was genuine. He was real. And the third thing was he didn't braid his hair. The Maharsha explains, what is the significance of long hair? Presumably, he had short hair. So what's the significance of long hair? What type of male in traditional Judaism would have long hair? Anybody know from the Torah? A Nazir. A Nazir is a person who takes upon himself to not cut his hair, to not drink wine, to stay away from impurities such as a cemetery, as a Cohen would. And it's funny that Torah gives people permission to adopt a Nazir lifestyle as if they wanted to live a holy, sacred lifestyle, separate from the world, separate from people. The Torah frowns upon it, though. It's ironic. It's one of those things where it's like a mitzvah that you can opt to do, yet it's frowned upon. Why is it frowned upon? Because you shouldn't have to be in that situation. But some people are in that situation. Some people are in a situation where they need to vow and separate themselves from the world because they get too enmeshed in the world too easily. Rabbi Zera was the type of leader who was not separate from the world. He didn't have long hair like a Nazir. He didn't have Nazir qualities. He wasn't on a holier than thou. He wasn't on a high horse. He was grounded in reality. He was approachable. And a rabbi needs both of these things. A rabbi can't just understand Torah. A rabbi has to understand the reality to which Torah applies. And that's true in any leadership position. But with that has to come a high level of approachability. You have to be able to approach that person. They have to be approachable. There's a story. I mean, it's an old story, and I'm sure it happened many times with many rabbis, where a lady had a simple question about kosher in the kitchen. She runs into the yeshiva, asks the rabbi the question. He says, "Let me research it for you." He says, "Come back soon." She leaves, and all the students are like, "Rabbi, we all know the answer to this. Come on, don't mix milk and meat." Like, it wasn't that complicated of a question. Why couldn't you just tell me the answer? He says, "Because I want to respect her question. She needs to realize that we're approachable. If I shoot out an answer, she might doubt the validity of her question and not ask questions in the future." Rabbi Zera was approachable. He wasn't on the high horse. He wasn't separate from the world. He understood people's needs. I'll tell you a great story. It's a bit of a weird story, but I'm going to say it. When I was working at a yeshiva in Florida, yeshiva for young college-age students, discovering Judaism for the first time. Many of them still exploring Judaism for the first time. Some of them went to Hebrew school as kids. Some of them did not. Some of them had a zero educational background, and they're exploring Judaism in depth for the first time. They're learning a full day. They're learning halacha. They're learning Talmud. And some of these students are here for a year. Some of them are here for a couple of months. Everybody has their own story. And somehow the conversation came up that a couple of these guys did not have a kosher bris as a kid. You know, they had a hospital circumcision, but not by a moel, which means you got to do it again. No, I'm kidding. But what that does mean, are you familiar with this procedure? If somebody did not get a proper bris by a moel, there is a procedure called hatafas dam, which means, poking. It's a small poke, almost like a diabetic might, drawing a microscopic amount of blood symbolically, because blood is a part of the bris service. And even though the circumcision took place, they never got the blood drawn in a kosher way, and that has to be done separately. And that's done by a moel. I don't remember how this came up in conversation, nor do I want to. No, I'm just kidding. I think there was a bris at the shul or something that we were at, the school we were at, whatever it was. There was like, and I said to a couple of the guys, you really should consider doing this. And they're like, yeah, no, we'll pass. I'm like, guys, it doesn't hurt. Just do it. Like, how do you know? I'm like, oh, shucks. I felt like this is important. They're going to, especially some of these guys were really on the trajectory of integrating within the community. And they're going to find themselves getting married and raising kids in a Jewish community and sending their kids to yeshivas, and they should have the basics down, have a proper bris. And I'm trying to convince them. And finally, they agree they're going to go to the Moel's house, who lived locally. and he's going to help them out. This Moel, this Moel looked like a very serious guy, but when you get to know him, he was great personality, as most Moels are, right? Um, but you look at him, you might be intimidated. You see a rabbi with a long gray beard with the side locks and the black coat, and he's, and they're like, we're doing this guy's house. He turns to them, he says, okay, guys, pull your pants down. And he pulls out this huge machete. They panicked. They freaked out. Like, yeah. He put down the knife. He's like, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It was a beautiful. It was a beautiful way to clear the. It was a beautiful way to clear the air. But what I learned from this rabbi is an incredible ability to connect with people in a very human way, not being too holy for people, not being on the high horse, being genuine, being real, just being a real, normal, good person that people want to call. Again, I think this is true in the rabbinate, true with Rabbi Zera, but it's true with any leadership position. Sometimes there's going to be high level for certain rabbis of certain stature. There is going to be distance. There is going to be space. There is going to be maybe reverence or respect. But if together with that, and I'm not saying that there shouldn't be, but if together with that, there can be a little bit of humanness. I mean, this is what Rabbi Zera did. He didn't make himself like a Nazir. He didn't make himself separate from the world. He didn't put on this facade of makeup, metaphorical makeup. And he had clear vision, was able to just see people for who they are and see things for what they were. He was a man of truth. This is the Maharsha's interpretation. Another interpretation. The context by which they're praising Rabbi Zera. Remember the context in the Talmud? If you look back, it says it's discussing what they used to sing to the brides in praising brides, because there's a concept of praising brides. And they'd apply that same praise to Rabbi Zera. In other words, the praise that you're giving to a bride, she doesn't even need makeup. They're giving that same praise to Rabbi Zera. He doesn't even need makeup. What's the connection? What's the connection between Rabbi Zera's scholarship, joining the rabbinate, and a bride who doesn't need makeup? See, here's what one of the commentaries explain. There's a commentary called the Oirach Yesharim, which I'll be honest, I'm unfamiliar with, but I saw this quoted. He says, why would a bride, in what situation would a bride not have makeup? Either she doesn't need it, but most brides will always wear makeup. That's a big day that you're preparing for. So when would you not wear makeup? If you're unprepared for the wedding, right? Shotgun wedding. No, if there's some sort of situation where, I don't know, God forbid, I don't know, there was a situation where you had to get the wedding done quickly. You had that during COVID, by the way, right? A lot of these little garage weddings, you quickly get a minion. You have situations throughout history where you don't have a lot of time to actually prepare for the wedding. So what they're saying that Rabbi Zera, like this bride, doesn't need makeup. He didn't prepare for the rabbinate. Well, what does that mean? What business does he have getting rabbinical tests in ordination if he's not prepared? You know why he's not prepared? Because he wasn't studying to be a rabbi. He was studying because that's what Jews do. We study. And maybe I'll be a rabbi. Maybe I won't. What's the difference? In other words, he was studying Torah because the Torah has inherent value. He wasn't being studious as a profession. As Jews, there's a mitzvah an obligation for every single Jew to study Torah. And that obligation isn't, if you want to become a rabbi, study the Torah. That obligation is study the Torah because you're a Jew. And some people will advance their studies to the point where they'll achieve a certain level of authority. This is very different than the way we treat other knowledge, because if you want to become a doctor, you're going to go to medical school. And if you don't want to become a doctor, you're not going to read those textbooks for fun. You'll just text your doctor or email your doctor. And if you have a legal question, you'll text your lawyer. You're not going to read them for fun if you don't want to become a lawyer. Same with any other profession. But the Torah is not just information, it's values. It's God's values. And the Torah is literally God's way of sharing vulnerability with us. Because when are we most vulnerable with people? When we're willing to share things that we care about in detail. We all have our own shtick. And when people get to learn about that shtick in detail and we're comfortable sharing that, our desires, that deepens the relationship. This is what God does. He shares the details of his desires, the Torah. Right before we were recording this, we had the discussion about tzitzis, right? What exactly does God want and how does he want it? When he wants the tzitzis, when he doesn't want the tzitzis. There's details. There's specific details to everything because this is God's way of sharing what he really wants deep down inside. So with Rabbi Zera's attitude of not preparing to be a rabbi, but studying because that's what Jews do, came a certain praise. He wasn't just trying to score a position. This is just who he is. It's literally an identity. I think this ties back to genuinity. I don't know if that's a word. Authenticity. There we go. That's authenticity. Because it's not my profession. I'm a rabbi. I'm a Jew who studies Torah. If I wasn't a rabbi, I'd also study. It's a passion. There's the Talmud points out something interesting, a different section of the Talmud, the Tractate Yuma, where it points out that the ark in the temple, in the Beis Hamikdash, the ark that contained the tablets, the luchos, what was the ark made out of? It was a box, essentially, right? That had the cherubim on top, right? Almost lost my microphone. It was a box that had 3 sections to it. It was 3 boxes in one, like stacked within each other. The outer layer was made out of solid gold. Then there was an inner layer of wood. And then that inner layer of wood was also lined with gold. And the Talmud says, well, I guess, why the gold on the inside? You have wood because maybe it's more durable, whatever it is. You have gold on the outside so it looks beautiful. But why do you need gold on the inside? To contain the Torah. Nobody's going to see it. Who cares? Right? That's where you can cheap out. The Talmud says, I'll say it in the Hebrew and then I'll translate it, that we derive from here, Kol Talmud Chacham, She'ein Tocho Kevaro Einoi Talmud Chacham, any scholar, any Torah scholar, whom his inside and his outside aren't aligned, we're not going to call that a scholar. If you're going to display gold on the outside and you're containing that Torah and representing its beauty on the outside, but you're not living it on the inside, that's not good leadership. If it's a profession that you check in, check out of, that's not good leadership. It has to be an identity. And the truth is, not everybody listening to this has the trajectory or aspiration to become a rabbi, but it applies to leadership. It applies to, it says in Pirkei Avos, Aseh lecha rav, get yourself a rabbi. But if you translate it literally, Aseh lecha rav, make yourself a rav, make yourself a rabbi. We have to take leadership and ownership of our lives, of our homes. And it's important that there's an authenticity to it, where it is a reflection of who I am. And if not a reflection of who I am, at least to some degree shapes who I am. But not just a behavior because I'm a Jew and this is what I'm supposed to be displaying because this is what I need people to see because I need to keep my job or because I need to keep my social status or because I want people. This is a relationship. It has to be very real on the inside. We've studied the Tanya together and we know from the Tanya that this is literally where the whole Tanya is trying to bring us to. An authentic relationship with God that is deep on the inside, that's meaningful on the inside, where there's deep connectivity and not just behavior. And this is what Rabbi Zera displayed. Rabbi Zera wasn't preparing a speech for an event, right? He wasn't preparing for a wedding, as it were. Didn't have the makeup on. He wasn't preparing for an event. He wasn't preparing for, he studied Torah. Right? The best teachers are the ones who aren't just preparing for a class, but are studying so much that they have information to draw from to prepare for a class. Because with that comes a high level of authenticity. Okay. Explanation number 3. Found in a book called the Eina Yitzchak, another commentary. And he says, what is this analogy of Rabbi Zera not wearing makeup, Rabbi Zera not wearing eyeliner, and Rabbi Zera not braiding his hair, as if you'd expect him to do that? What's the analogy here? He used to say things as they were. He used to speak clearly, and he used to teach the Torah as it was, without sugarcoating things, which is an incredible quality, a very difficult quality. Because a person who's in a position of leadership has what's called an occupational hazard. That occupational hazard is, if I tell you everything you want to hear, you don't need me. And if I tell you what you need to hear, but it ain't popular, you're going to fire me. Right? It's a very difficult balance to be in. Right? Like Groucho Marx said, what do I want to be part of a club that wants me as a member? Like what? Right? There's this occupational hazard. There's this, but Rabbi Zera was genuine. He didn't care. He didn't sugarcoat his words. He didn't put makeup and try to cushion what he was saying. I'm not saying he was harsh necessarily, but he saw his position as a rabbi, as somebody studying Torah, as somebody who needs to be an ambassador of truth and not just there to say what people want to hear. And he was praised for that. I'm just suggesting or positing this idea because I haven't seen it anywhere. The fact that Rabbi Zera is this story, this praise is juxtaposed to praising a bride with the same qualities. Maybe it's this authenticity and honesty that keeps marriages going, where it's founded on truth, not just founded on a fleeting, on makeup. Makeup you wash off, right? And I don't mean people shouldn't be presentable. That's not what I'm trying to say. But there's a certain there's a certain authenticity where somebody can get up and literally just say things the way they are in a way that's not offensive, in a way that people appreciate, where you don't have to be a politician. A rabbi or a leader is not a politician, which means somebody who needs to appeal to voters. Rabbi Zera wasn't that person. Rabbi Zera was the type of person who was just very real. He just says it like it is. He shares the Torah, he shares the values, and he's not trying to dress it up. Okay, that's all I got for today. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.